Good morning. Um, when you are really, really into a topic, it can be difficult to remember the questions you had when you were just starting to dive into it. So, with that in mind, I reached out to our community and asked what questions they had when it came to textile history, textile science, all those sorts of fun things. And boy, did you have some excellent questions. We aren't going to be able to get to all of them, and some of them are such big questions that they warrant a video in and of themselves. But here are some of those questions, and let's do a nerdy little deep dive and have some fun. Diana Curtis asks, we hear about linen, cotton, wool, and silk. Have you come across any intriguing tidbits about other fibers such as nettles, hemp, and combinations we don't tend to use now, such as linsey woolsey? And Diana, your question speaks right to my soul, and I am here to hyper focus all over it. So to begin with, I think a really cool textile fiber that is, none of the fibers that you mentioned, is the oldest piece of, twisted fiber that we know about today. Comes from a cave in modern day France, and it's dated to between 41 to 52,000 years ago, which puts us at a time when Neanderthals were roaming the land. And every time we find tools and equipment from this era, we usually have to revisit our preconceived notions of how barbaric and, untechnological they were, because there is so much more refinement than we think, and there's so much we can learn from. I think this piece of thread was like a few centimeters long. They're not very big, but they still tell us a lot. So the coolest thing is that previously, one of the oldest textiles we had prior to discovering this was a different cave, still, in a similar region, and it was a linen type fiber, a plant textile, plant fiber, but this is from a coniferous tree. So trees like spruce or pine or and other things. And I don't know if you ever looked at the bark of a spruce tree, but that wouldn't be the first place I would look at to extract textile fibers, but these people did. And it's amazing because what you do is that you peel off the bark and you soak it, just similar to retting of linen, which is exactly what it is, and you extract the inner bark of the bark, well, of the plant, of the tree. And it is the same for linen, hemp, rami, nettle fibers. Even though these are, tall plants but not trees, for both of them we extract the inner bark, or the phloem, I think it's called botanically. For smaller plants like linen and hemp, it's also called the bast layer, but it's the same process. You put it in water to rot away the parts that you don't use, and you're left with almost entirely cellulose fibers that you can spin into thread. And this thread, this oldest piece of spun fiber that we have at the moment, is amazingly intricate because it is a 3-ply thread and pretty thin. And just like we would today, you spin the individual threads in one direction, and when you ply the yarn together, you spin in the other direction so that it interlocks and the thread stays stable. And this is exactly what they did. This is exactly what they had done. This technology has not changed for almost 50,000 years, which I think is cool. But don't think that we just evolved to be like, no, trees are too much hassle, we're just gonna go to easier, smaller plants, reedier plants like linen and hemp. No, Because if we look at the world map, especially around, the Pacific Islands, parts of India, middle parts of Africa, and, middle parts of Americas, including Japan, and there is still a tradition for making and using bark cloth because they have suitable trees and they have the technology and the knowledge to do it. And these clothes that they make look amazing. One of the tribes that do this are the Ainu people, who are an indigenous people in the north of Japan, and they didn't, do agriculture. They did more hunting and so they used animal skins for warmth, but they also extracted bark cloth from trees and made some amazingly detailed woven robes. And I just think that is really cool if we are talking about fibers, plant fibers that are not, wool, linen, silk, or anything like that. There are just some really, really gorgeous examples of amazingly skilled crafts with materials that many of us wouldn't really think to use in that way. And when it comes to nettles, my point of reference is going to be, Northern Europe, Scandinavia, Iron Age, thereabouts, because that is where I have the most research interest and knowledge. And we know more and more as we learn more about history, how many biases we have held without realizing that they were biases. One thing was that when, 19th century, 20th century, early archaeologists dug up graves from the Viking Age, they were like, pearls, you're female, sword, you're male. And then now we're starting to see that that is not necessarily true. We find graves where there are both pearls and swords, and many examples that women could be warriors, men could wear pearls. There's not that rigid distinction that we thought there was, and a lot of things have to be reclassified. And same with plant fibers, because it is the inner bark that we extract from all of these different plants. It is very difficult to distinguish, say, a nettle fabric from a linen fabric from a hemp fabric of similar weight and quality with the naked eye, because it's very similar botanically. It's, the cellulose from the inner bark, and when you spin it, it looks very similar. So we classified a lot of plant fibers from Iron Age, Bronze Age as linen, because that was our expectation, that was what we thought they had. But now we're learning with modern analytical methods and different ways of measuring this that a lot of these textiles were actually hemp and nettle. It wasn't just sort of a fringe textile that some villages made some of the time. No, these were large parts of the plant fiber, sort of how it was put together. And it just goes to show that history is so much more varied and interesting than we like to sort of tell. Like, it's not as simplified of a story as we sometimes get told in school. It's a lot more nuanced. It's so much cooler than we may have been led to believe. And nettle fabric was prized. It was not, linen's sad little sister. No, nettle was so prized as a tablecloth, as bedclothes, as curtains especially, that in 1720 there were sumptuary laws in Denmark that prohibited commoners from wearing what was nicknamed, silk of the north, the finest of the nettle fabrics, because the wealthy and the royals were just like, no, you're not allowed to wear this. This is for us. And they talk about how it is, stiffer than cotton, but sheerer and finer than fine cotton cloth. So there are just so many cool things out there. I don't know if that answers your question about interesting tidbits about other fabrics, but there is so much cool textile science out there, and I low-key want to try to make some textile fabric and nettle fabric, because that sounds really, really cool. Linsey woolsey is another thing you asked about, which, if you're not familiar, is a nickname for a fabric. Well, it came from Linsey in, I think, the UK, and it has a linen warp with a wool weft. And it was popular, 17th century, 18th century, especially in the colonies, in the English colonies, because they didn't have that much wool, especially in the beginning. So it was a way to, stretch wool to last longer, because you didn't use wool for half of your textile. And this is not a new thing. We have examples of similar fabrics from Iron Age Scandinavia as well. And I actually went to a plant dyeing course with a friend of mine, and she had one of these, linen warp wool weft fabrics, and we decided to try to plant dye it just for fun. And we chose Allen because we know that Allen is a good mordant for wool. It's not a very good mordant for linen, so how would that come out? And yes, exactly like we expected, this previously, off-white natural undyed textile came out. We were doing, I think they're called common reed in English. It's a reed, and we used the very purple flowers on top to dye, and it came out in this like gorgeous, vibrant greenish yellow, but only the wool. So suddenly you had a textile with a lot more depth and life to it, because the linen was still linen colored and undyed, while the wool had this vibrant color, and it became this really cool diamond pattern. Let's move on. Next we have Emily, who asks, I am really intrigued by bamboo linen, but every time I search for it, Google misunderstands it to mean bamboo viscose and not linen made of bamboo like flax is. And I had to have a long, good think about this, because I was like, is this a fabric I haven't heard about? Is there a way to make linen fabric out of bamboo? And so I went all the way down the botanical route, and in the end, I know bamboo is a grass, so it's not similar to hemp or linen or flax or nettle or any of the other plants that we extract, cellulose plant fibers from. But what I found was that bamboo, being a monocot plant, doesn't have an inner bark structure like linen or flax has. So it's simply not possible to extract the inner bark fiber from bamboo in the same way that you would from a flax plant, because it doesn't have that same botanical part. So sadly, as much as it sounds very, very cool, bamboo linen is simply a mixture of bamboo viscose and linen fabric, similar to cotolin, where you have about 50% cotton and 50% linen. So it's a mixture of two fibers, not one extracted in a different way, sadly. Next we have Kay Gintelberg asks, workout clothes without polyester and etc. And cotton is good, linen is good, even wool if it's cold. I think a lot of this question is actually, asking about things like social norms and whether you'll be looked at weird because in gyms it is such an expectation that you will wear a special kind of clothes. I think it's more about where you frequent, what you're used to, what you associate with workout clothes, because I've been to, a couple of martial arts dojos and ask anyone there if you need polyester or synthetic fibers to exercise. Most, judo gis, karate gi, jiu-jitsu gis, they're all cotton. If it's a cheaper one, maybe it's, mixed slightly with polyester, but traditionally they are all thick, heavyweight, cotton-based. And these people have some of the most extensive exercise regimes that I have ever, been a part of, and the cotton handles it perfectly nice. You launder it, you take care of it, it's not a problem. I've never had any weird, I've never thought it was weird or extra smelly, or even some people complain that cotton gets, soaked, but this is such heavyweight cotton that even when people are throwing each other around, it still looks like it did in the beginning, usually on the outside. So I think the question about workout clothes, because we have been doing heavy manual labor and exercise in, plant fibers, linen, wool, hemp, cotton, all the things we just talked about for hundreds of years before synthetic garments were a thing. So I think this is more about feeling like you look different to everyone else and what you're used to than the suitability of any other fiber, if that makes sense. Kei Awong asks, what is the least polluting type of clothing? And this is going to sound tongue-in-cheek, but it really, really isn't. The least polluting type of clothing that you have are the clothing you already have. And I know quality is going down. I know clothing is falling apart around us almost as fast as we can wear it. And it is really, really frustrating. But, it forces us back to the fast fashion shops to buy more cheap clothing because that is all we can afford at the rate they are seemingly shredding around us. It doesn't even feel worth mending them because they just fall apart so fast. But we have only one planet and a terrible lot of people to clothe, feed, house, and otherwise provide for. And one of the only ways that we can make compostable natural fibers less problematic in the long run is to reduce consumption. So yes, mending and sprucing things up if we grow tired of them, supporting people who can mend or spruce things up for us while we provide them something they want or need if we don't want to or are able to do it ourselves. And in the whole lifestyle aspect of things, we need more clothes that can be taken apart when they are at the end of their wearable life. Composite clothing with mixed fibers, sequins, zippers, rivets, and other metals, or forces forbid electronics, are next to impossible to recycle because we don't have the technology to separate those individual components. Plus, recycling really, really doesn't work nearly as well as many of us have been led to believe, and is not something we can continue to rely on as much as we currently are. But beyond that, I am not I don't want to say that any one textile fiber or any one technique is, the cure-all to our problem, is the most sustainable, because what we see is that whenever something, gets singled out, it gets overtaxed. We've seen this in the food industry a lot. So, acai and soap nuts and quinoa, are all examples of indigenous foods, soap nuts, indigenous washing practices that they had been using for hundreds of years. And then they become popular and sustainable, and suddenly they are super popular, they are expensive, they get exported to, the US and to Europe. And the original indigenous people who have been growing up using it, for generations, suddenly can't afford to use their own cultural things. And that is something that I'm worried about. Like, if you say linen is the cure-all and it's very sustainable because it's compostable, then you risk overtaxing it, because something that is sustainable to me, like in Norway, we know that we burn and compost a lot of wool because we don't use Norwegian wool. We like to import. We've been told that merino wool from Australia is much better than our coarse Norwegian wool, so we import it because we think it's better, and advertising is working hard to continue to tell us that story. And it's not that there's anything necessarily wrong with merino wool from Australia, but I am, in Northern Europe. It has to travel halfway across the globe to get to me. So that makes more sense if you are in Australia to use Australian wool. And, so what is sustainable to me is not going to be what is sustainable to you. Japan and other parts of Southeast Asia have excellent cotton growing conditions. And so cotton is going to be a really great choice there. In Eastern Europe, we have some great linen production, some high quality stuff that would be closer to what I would try to source, because that is sort of closer to me geographically, and trying to look for clothes that are sort of local to you. It's usually going to be more expensive, which is frustrating because finances are a very real thing, and it's difficult to, when you have these fast fashion clothes falling apart around you, to say that I need to sort of try to get some clothing that's going to last longer and be of a higher quality, because I know that, you know, day-to-day finances is difficult for a lot of people. To me, it's been a very, very, very slow process. I still wear a lot of sort of fast fashion-ish garments because I've had neighbors who have cleaned out their closets and I happen to be the right size. So, you know, the frugal part of me is like, of course I would like to accept some of these jeans and t-shirts and whatever, because that means I can wear through them, I can mend them, I can, you know, sacrifice. I like to call them my sacrificial pair of jeans, because if I have several pairs of jeans, I have one pair that where I'm continually cutting out patches, because indigo is very, like, it's usually the color used for denim, so it means that it's matching more or less. Even if it's a little darker or a little lighter, that's okay. They still look nice enough together, and then I patch the living daylight out of them until they fall apart. And that is one way that I try to sort of extend the life of the clothes that I own, is to make sure that I wear them absolutely to death, mend them absolutely to death, and then try to slowly, as I can afford it, replace them with other garments that I have made, because I do enjoy making things that will last hopefully much longer. So I hope that doesn't feel like a cop-out answer, because there are so many factors at play here that it's very, very difficult to say, like, you know, this is the best. But yeah, I haven't bought new clothes in, I don't remember how long. I've been lucky enough to be given clothes secondhand, which and when I need to look for stuff, I do look in secondhand shops, which I know is a luxury, because it takes time. It takes time to look for clothes. It takes time to try them on. It takes time to go through the secondhand shops, because they often only have a few items in your size. So all of those things are, you know, luxuries in a way. But even if we are looking for, you know, new clothes made sustainably by small companies local to us, it's still a matter of finding things local to us. I mean, I could tell you about this really, really cool wool project in Norway, where they have imported this expensive, complicated knitting machine, complete with technician from Japan, who came to teach them how to use this thing and, you know, stay a couple of years, make sure they properly understand everything that's going on with this complicated machine, because we know hand knitting can't compete with machine knitting, but how can we turn the wool of our local sheep into things that are actually something we can sell, and still being, you know, small scale, still being local sheep, still being they are just starting production. Like, we get some news articles about this, and it's really, really cool. They are using undyed wool of just, you know, like different colors, you know, undyed white, brown, black. And I could tell you about those. I'm going to show you some pictures, don't worry. But if you live on the other side of the globe, it isn't as realistic or like as feasible. Like, it wouldn't make sustainable sense for you to buy a sweater all the way from Norway and have it transported all the way to your side of the globe, when there probably exists similar initiative closer to you that would, you know, unless you're traveling and buy it as you're traveling, like there would be incentives closer to you that will make more sustainable sense. Because one thing we often tend to forget when we talk about sustainability and what's sustainable is that things need to travel a long way away. And with the textile industry, things often travel across the world multiple times before they're done. Like you travel the materials, then you travel to a place to spin it, and then the spun thread travels to a weaving mill, and then the weaving mill is like the cloth is transported to a sewing mill. And it's just insane to think about how many times materials travel across the world before it becomes clothing, and then it travels from that factory to somewhere else, again halfway across the world, to be sold in shops to us. And that is something that I think we need to think about when it comes to life cycle analysis and the full cost of something that we're buying, in addition to how life cycle analysis, which is a field in its own right, they often don't think that we're going to wear clothes for very long. They're using averages that are based on how the society uses things. And one of the things that we can do to really, bring down the average cost per wear, both in terms of money and in terms of materials used, is to just use it for a lot longer. Use your clothes for, like, get used to using clothes a lot. I hope that answers parts of your questions, at least. And then we have Liquid Running, who asks, microplastic, are we doomed? And isn't this a lighthearted note to end on? No, I don't think we're doomed. And that is because life is resilient. Humans are resilient. The planet is very resilient. I mean, I like to say that, no matter what, the planet is going to survive, even if we might struggle with increased extreme adverse weather events and polluting our own drinking water and what have you. But even if, there are already microorganisms that are showing signs of, they can eat oil spills, there are both microorganisms and fungi eating, oil spills, eating plastic. We see the starts of these sort of microorganisms in places, both in research and sometimes in real life. Like, we have seen multiple instances where there has been an oil spill and people and researchers have taken specific strands of bacteria and sort of sprayed the oil spill, and it sort of disintegrated a lot faster than it would otherwise have if they hadn't done anything to it, which is great. So I think that nature is learning. It might not be very fast. It might not be, a year or two. These things take time. But I don't think it's going to be like, I don't remember which time period that was. Paleontologists, probably going to correct me. But there was a time, when trees evolved and they died, nature didn't know what to do with it. It was especially the lignin in, the tree, in the stem of the tree, that nothing had evolved yet to break down. So you would have all these trees and they would die, and you would have more trees, and sort of nature just overflowed with dead trees that was just lying there because nothing had evolved yet to break it down. And even if that was the case with plastics and microplastics, it's not great. I'm not going to say that we should just continue as normal. We definitely should do something about it, but doomed is such a final word. Just like I avoid, saying never or always, because, they are such extremes, and usually the answer lies somewhere in between. So I think we should definitely think about these things. I think we should definitely reduce our use and dependence on plastics, but I don't think we're doomed. Nature has a way of finding a way, and even if that is with or without us, the planet is gonna continue, I do think. But it would be much more fun if we got to be along for the ride, wouldn't it? That was a handful of questions from you, and I hope that was as fun for you as it was for me. I had a lot of fun. I'm saving a lot of these questions for later, because some of these are, I just want to do some deep dives straight away, and I hope you're going to come along for the ride. But for now, that was everything, and go be curious about stuff. Bye!